The rain came down like drumming fingers on the windows of Ashford House, a sprawling monument of gray stone and colder silences. Inside, crystal chandeliers blazed over a dining table set for 20, and Lady Helena Ashford sat at the far end like a modest watercolor hung too far from the light. Her husband, Sebastian, the Duke of Ashford, occupied the head of the table, his dark head inclined toward the vivacious Lady Cecily March, a widow whose laughter rang like struck glass. He had spoken no more than 5 words to Helena since the soup course. He did not notice the way his wife's hand stilled around her spoon, nor the careful, steady breath she drew as if steadying herself against a wave. Helena had worn a new gown that evening, a deep blue silk that the modiste had assured her brought out the gold in her hair. Sebastian's gaze had passed over her entirely, settling on the empty chair beside him as if it were more interesting. She was not angry. Anger required a belief that things could be otherwise, and she had relinquished that hope months ago, maybe longer. The marriage had begun as a transaction. 2 years earlier, her father's debts had loomed like a pit, and the Duke's solicitor had proposed an arrangement, her hand in exchange for settlement of the obligations. Sebastian had looked at her once across a drawing room, assessed her quiet bearing, and nodded as one did when agreeing to a tolerable business term. She had not wept. She had packed her books and her mother's shawl and walked into a life that asked nothing of her except to exist unseen. She performed the role well. Too well. After dinner, the guests withdrew to the music room. Lady Cecily sat at the pianoforte, and Sebastian leaned against the instrument, turning pages for her with an intimacy that made Helena's throat tighten. She stood near the doorway, a cup of untouched ratafia cooling in her palm, and watched her husband smile at another woman in a way he had never smiled at her. The notes swam together. She set the cup down and left the room without a sound. In her bedchamber, she lit a single candle and pulled out a leather satchel from beneath her wardrobe. For weeks she had been preparing in small, silent acts of rebellion. She had sold her embroidery, delicate botanical designs, to a shop in the village under a false name and saved the coins. She had written to a bookseller in Saltcombe, a seaside town she remembered from childhood summers, and secured modest lodgings and work. Every step had felt like unpicking a seam that held her together. Now she sat at the writing desk and penned a letter. Her script was even, unhurried. Sebastian, I have gone where I am no longer a shadow. Do not search. I have taken nothing that was yours. Helena, she folded the paper, sealed it with plain wax, and left it on the pillow of the bed she had slept in alone since her wedding night. Then she pulled on a traveling cloak, took her satchel, and slipped down the servant's stair into the wet, waiting dark. The hired coach rattled through the gates just as the first pale seam of dawn split the sky. Helena pressed her forehead to the cold glass and did not look back. She felt fear, sharp as a blade against her ribs, but beneath it something else stirred. A feeling so unfamiliar it took her a long moment to name it: freedom. Sebastian found the letter when he went to inform Helena that he would be away in London for a fortnight. Her chamber door was ajar, the bed unslept in, the curtains still drawn. The paper lay against the white linen like a scar. He read it 3 times, his mind refusing the words. Then a cold, creeping dread filled his chest. He called for his valet, the housekeeper, footman. The household was searched. Helena's wardrobe was mostly intact, but a few practical gowns were missing, along with her traveling cloak and a small leather satchel no one could remember seeing before. His first instinct was to summon the constable, but pride and confusion stayed his hand. She had left him. His quiet, obedient wife had walked out into the night. The audacity of it staggered him. So did the realization, harder and sharper, that he did not know where she might go. He did not know if she had friends. He did not even know the name of her favorite book, though she was always reading. He rode to her father's house, a shabby manor in Hertfordshire. The old baronet, too fond of port, blinked at him in bewilderment. Gone. Helena would not have the spirit to leave a drawing room without permission. You must have mislaid her. Dismissal sickened Sebastian. He returned to Ashford and interrogated her maid, a young girl named Polly, who trembled under his questions. Her ladyship visited the lending library in the village, your grace. She was friends with the bookseller, Mr. Timmins, and she did needlework. She sold it at the milliner's. I was not to speak of it. Felt the ground shift beneath him. His wife had been living a secret life under his roof, earning her own money, building an escape, and he had been too absorbed in estate affairs and political dinners to notice a single clue. The guilt arrived not as a thunderclap but as a slow, seeping cold. Within a sennight he traced her to Saltcombe. The bookseller, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers, had written a brief reply to a previous inquiry. Her Grace is well and does not wish to be disturbed. Sebastian left for the coast at dawn. Saltcombe perched on grey cliffs above a churning sea, its narrow streets smelling of salt and bread. He found the bookshop at the end of a cobbled lane, a crooked little building with a painted sign that read Pendower's Books and Curiosities. Through the bow window, he saw her. Helena stood behind the counter, her hair unpinned and falling over one shoulder in a thick braid. She wore a simple muslin gown, an apron tied at her waist, and she was laughing at something an old woman said while wrapping a parcel with nimble fingers. A cluster of children sat on the floor at her feet, listening as she read aloud from a picture book about seabirds. Her voice carried through the open door, animated, warm, alive in a way he had never heard. Sebastian's breath stopped. This was the woman who had sat mute at his table, who had drifted through Ashford House like a quiet ghost. Here she radiated light. He pushed open the door. A brass bell chimed. Helena looked up and the laughter died on her lips. Her face did not pale, it simply closed like a curtain drawn across a bright window. "Your Grace," she said. The children swiveled to stare at him, sensing the sudden tension. She set the book down, her hands steady. "You have traveled a long way for nothing," stepped forward, forgetting the shop, the onlookers. "Helena, please come home." She tilted her head, examining him as if he were a text in a language she had once studied but no longer needed. "I am home," she said. He took rooms at the Gull's Rest, the only inn that Saltcombe could offer, and spent 3 days attempting to breach the walls Helena had erected. She did not refuse to speak to him, but she granted him only what she might give a visiting acquaintance: polite, distant conversation in the bookshop while she shelved volumes or mended torn pages. She did not invite him to her lodgings. She did not introduce him as her husband. Sebastian learned that she assisted Mr. Pendower, the elderly bookseller whose eyesight was failing, and that in exchange she received a small wage and the use of the rooms above the shop. She had begun writing short tales for the village children, fables about selkies and brave fisher girls, which she illustrated herself with pressed seaweed and watercolors. The children adored her. So did the local physician, a gentle-mannered man named Dr. Penrose, who called at the shop each afternoon with a new book for her to consider and a smile that lingered too long. On the 3rd evening, Sebastian intercepted her as she closed the shop. "I have made a terrible mistake," he said, and the words felt like pulling a thorn from deep flesh. "I did not see you." Helena drew the shutters into place, her movements economical. "You saw what you expected to see. A quiet girl who would not trouble you. That was not a mistake, that was your preference." Truth of it lanced him. He had no defense. He watched her turn the key in the lock, her profile limned by the last orange glow of sunset, and he felt an urgent, desperate need to touch her hand. He did not. "I want to make amends," he said. "Then go back to London," she replied, "and let me breathe." She brushed past him, and he caught the faint scent of paper and lavender, a scent that did not belong to the drawing rooms of his memory. He followed her gaze and saw a stack of handwritten pages on the counter, weighted down by a piece of sea glass. The title page read "The Caged Linnet." Before he could ask, she gathered the pages and tucked them into her satchel with a swiftness that told him he was not meant to have seen. The next morning, a carriage arrived to take him back to Ashford. Family obligations demanded his presence. He stood in the bookshop doorway, hat in hand, feeling more a stranger to this woman than the day he had married her. "If you ever wish to speak to me again," he said, "write, I will come." Helena looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Goodbye, Your Grace." She did not watch the carriage leave, but from the window of her little room above the shop, she parted the curtain and followed its retreat until it vanished beyond the cliff road. Then she pressed her forehead to the glass, the same way she had on the morning of her flight, and wondered if she had made the right choice in letting him go without telling him that a part of her still remembered how to hope. London, 6 months later, was aflame with gossip. A novel entitled The Caged Linnet had appeared from the mysterious author, H.M. Cole, and was devoured in every drawing room from Mayfair to Bloomsbury. The story followed a gentlewoman trapped in a loveless marriage to a proud, absent aristocrat and her slow, triumphant journey to independence by the sea. The prose was needle-sharp, the emotions raw. Speculation raged about the author's identity. Sebastian read it in a single night in his library, the fire dying to embers. His hands trembled as he turned the final page. He recognized every wound laid bare, every stolen moment of his wife's silent suffering translated into elegant, devastating fiction. The scene where the heroine sat at a dinner party while her husband laughed with a widow. He had to set the book down and press his fists to his eyes. She was brilliant. She had been brilliant all along, and he had not known. He discovered through careful inquiry that H.M. Cole was expected at a literary salon in Bath, hosted by Lady Arbuthnot, a patroness of the arts. He arrived uninvited, his heart a stone in his throat. The salon glowed with candlelight and the murmur of cultured voices. Helena stood near the hearth, dressed in amber silk, her hair dressed with simple elegance. Men and women circled her, praising the novel, asking her views on emancipation and art. She answered with a quiet confidence that made her seem taller, brighter, utterly removed from the pale figure he remembered. When their eyes met, she did not flinch. She excused herself and walked toward the French doors leading to the garden. He followed. The night air was heavy with the perfume of night-blooming jasmine. She stopped beside a stone bench and turned to face him. "You read it." "I did." His voice was rough. "Helena, there are no words adequate. I was blind. I was cruel without even knowing I was cruel. That book is the most courageous thing I have ever read." She folded her arms as if to ward off a chill. "I did not write it for you. I wrote it for the woman I used to be so she would know she was not invisible. I want to try again." He stepped closer, close enough to see the faint glimmer of unshed moisture on her lashes. "Let me court you. Let me learn who you are." She let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "And what of your position, your political ambitions? A wife who writes scandalous novels will not help you in the Lords." "I do not care about the Lords," he said, and meant it with a ferocity that surprised him. "I care about you." Helena studied him for a long, silent moment. Then she reached into her reticule and drew out a folded list. "These are 10 books. Read them, every one. Write to me about them with an honest heart. Then we shall see." He took the list as if she had handed him a holy relic. "I will." She turned and walked back into the golden light of the salon, leaving him standing among the jasmine with a fragile, terrifying hope spreading through his chest like dawn. The letters began a week later, carried by messenger to Saltcombe. Sebastian wrote in his own hand, not through a secretary. He confessed he had wept at Belinda by Maria Edgeworth, raged at Wollstonecraft's vindication, and found unexpected tenderness in the poems of William Blake. Helena replied, at first with caution, then with growing warmth, debating his interpretations, challenging his assumptions. Through ink and paper, they fell into a conversation they had never had as husband and wife. He visited Saltcombe again, not as a duke demanding return, but as a man carrying a parcel of new books and an armload of kindling for the shop stove. He helped Mr. Pendower catalogue a donation of Greek histories. He sat on the floor and read aloud to the children when Helena's voice grew tired. He did not flinch when a little boy with sticky fingers climbed into his lap. The village watched and wondered. Dr. Penrose, the kind physician, brought Helena a volume of Keats and offered a gentle smile. "A duke who sweeps floors," he remarked one afternoon. "Quite a curiosity." Helena only smiled and said nothing. But her heart had begun to beat differently at the sound of Sebastian's step on the stair. One afternoon he took her on a picnic to the cliffs above the sea. The wind tossed her hair and pulled color into her cheeks. They spoke of childhood dreams, his of sailing to the Indies before duty claimed him, hers of owning a library where anyone might borrow a book. Laughter came easier now, bubbling up without caution. When the sun began its descent, they packed the basket in silence. Sebastian reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb grazing the corner of her lips. "May I?" she answered by leaning into his hand. He kissed her with a tenderness that held no demand, only question, and she answered that too, her fingers curling into the lapel of his coat. But the world would not wait. A letter arrived from his aunt, the Dowager Duchess, summoning him to London. His prolonged absence had stirred talk. The family demanded he either bring Helena back under his roof or seek an annulment to save the Ashford name. Worse, Viscount Blackwood, a wealthy, progressive peer who admired the caged linnet, arrived in Saltcombe with flowers and a proposal for Helena. A marriage of mutual respect and intellectual partnership, no shadows, no chains. Helena received the Viscount politely but asked for time. That evening, she walked with Sebastian along the harbor wall and told him of the offer. He stopped, his face pale under the twilight. "What did you tell him?" "That I would consider his suit," she said, "because I will not return to the woman I was. If I come back to you, it must be as your equal, not your ornament." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Then I will make a choice, not for my name but for you. Meet me in London in a fortnight. I will give you my answer before all the world." She searched his eyes and saw something there that had not existed 2 years before, genuine, desperate love. She nodded. The ballroom of Ashford House blazed with candles and the rustle of silk. The Dowager Duchess had orchestrated the event to force Sebastian's hand, confident he would announce the dissolution of his inexplicable marriage. Instead, he stood at the top of the staircase, Helena at his side in a gown of emerald velvet, her chin high. A murmur spread through the crowd. The vanished Duchess had returned. Sebastian raised his voice over the string quartet. "I have invited you here tonight not to celebrate a parting but a reunion. My wife Helena, the Duchess of Ashford, is the author of The Caged Linnet." Gasps. A dropped fan. Lady Cecily turned the color of old milk. "She wrote a work of truth and beauty that exposed my failings as a husband," Sebastian continued, his voice strong. "I am not ashamed of her. I am ashamed only that I gave her cause to write it. I intend to spend the remainder of my life earning the honor of standing at her side." He paused. "I am also resigning my seat in the Lords. My duty now is to my marriage and to the community my wife has taught me to see." Before the shock could fully register, Viscount Blackwood stepped forward, handsome and sneering. "Brave words, Ashford, but how do we know the Duchess truly wrote the novel? Perhaps you are lending your name to a fantasy." Helena's eyes flashed, but Sebastian raised a hand. He produced a sheaf of letters, her letters describing plot points, sharing draft passages. "Here is the proof of her authorship in her own hand from our correspondence over many months. I have witnessed her brilliance intimately. If any man doubts her, he may read these and then apologize to her face." Blackwood's expression crumpled. The crowd, so eager for scandal, now shifted toward awe. Helena stepped forward and took Sebastian's hand, her voice carrying clearly. "I will return to Ashford, but on one condition. The marriage must be a partnership of equals. I will not be managed, patronized, or silenced. I will continue my writing, and the east wing of our home will become a public lending library for the village." Turned to her, and before the assembled ton, he sank to one knee, a duke kneeling to his own wife. "You have always been my equal, Helena. I was too arrogant to recognize it. If you will have me, I vow myself to that partnership now and forever." A hush fell, thick as velvet. Then Helena smiled, a smile that began in her eyes and spread like light across water. She drew him to his feet and kissed his cheek. "Then let us begin." The east wing of Ashford House no longer smelled of dust and disuse. It smelled of beeswax, leather bindings, and the faint salt breeze that drifted through open windows. Shelves lined every wall, and a great bay window seat invited readers to curl up with a book. The lending library was open 3 days a week to the village, and Helena herself often read stories to children in the corner that had become known as the Linnet's Nook. Sebastian, no longer a man of politics, spent his mornings managing the estate with a renewed sense of purpose, and his afternoons in the library, where he had become an expert at repairing torn pages. He and Helena debated literature, philosophy, and the proper way to brew tea with an energy that made the servants smile behind their hands, One soft June evening, they walked in the garden, arm in arm, as the roses released their scent into the cooling air. Helena paused beside a trellis of climbing white blooms and placed her hand over her stomach. "There is something I have been waiting to tell you," she said, her voice hushed with joy. Sebastian looked at her, and understanding dawned slowly like the first light over the sea. His eyes filled. He took her face in his hands with a reverence that needed no words, then pressed his brow to hers and wept without shame. Later, at a gathering to celebrate her second novel, a story of a marriage reborn, full of hard-won grace, Helena stood before their friends and neighbors and raised a glass. "To second chances," she said, "and to the courage to write our own endings." Sebastian lifted his glass, his gaze never leaving her face. "To the woman who taught me that love is not possession but sight. To my wife, my partner, my heart." Outside the window, the sun dipped below the Ashford woods, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. They walked out together into the twilight, their shadows long on the lawn, no longer two separate forms but one, woven together by choice, by struggle, by a love that had learned to see.